Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to Sports Talk 920. I am your host, Michael Goodman. And, well, if you're listening to me live right now, I can tell you one thing. You watched probably a pretty sloppy day in the NFL. Um, we have the Cubs going to the World Series for the first time since 1945, and also the Cleveland Indians for the first time since 1997. So, pretty good matchup for maybe a feel-good story being set up either way for the World Series. And, of course, Joey Logano wins at Talladega today, and they're now narrowed to the round of 8, and that will start next weekend at Martinsville. Let's start first off that last we actually talked was probably before the Dallas Cowboys game last week, and of course, it's a weird twist of fate for the Green Bay Packers probably since we last spoke. Kind of a roller coaster ride, maybe up and down to where this Packer team is or was and now is again. But basically, I think, obviously last week Packers lose 30-16 at home to the Dallas Cowboys in a kind of a pathetic effort, almost offensively and defensively. They couldn't get it going on either side of the ball, especially with now Sam Shields out for the year, most of the year on IR, and then losing Rollins and Randall, the two young corners that provided you with so much depth. I don't think you anticipated three cornerbacks getting hurt and then going back to that narrow of that deep into your rung of cornerbacks. But it was the situation the Packers were in. It was hard against the Dallas Cowboys. A very, very solid offense that could kind of dink and dunk their way down the ball. I mean, considering they did. There was a few big plays I think that made that game worse than hard to say as it probably was. The 5 fumbles for the Green Bay Packers. Rodgers looked off, couldn't protect the ball. Jordy Nelson, he's had his fumbles. He had a fumble in that game last week. And, Ty Montgomery when they were kind of trying to drive down to their last-ditch effort. So, I mean, offensively they were off too. And I think every time you turn the ball over, set favorable field position to the Dallas Cowboys, they did capitalize on it most of the time. But really, for how badly both sides of the teams played, both sides of the ball, really surprised that even it was that long or that good of a game or that close of a game for that long, especially the Packers not being able to punch it in the end zone until late in the fourth quarter, almost in, maybe you could say in garbage time at that point too. But anyway, during all week this past week, the Packers were in trouble. They're going to end up being a 7-9 ball club. And, they're people were hitting the abort button, hitting the abandoned ship. But, still had a game to be played on Thursday. Then they went into Thursday, starting the first half. Kind of looked like the same thing. The offense wasn't clicking. The defense was holding up their end of the bargain, holding the Bears to minimal yards, even throughout the entire game. But we did see the offense get clicking in the second half with a lot of short passes and kind of Ty Montgomery doing little swing passes that are out of the backfield. So that kind of replaced Eddie Lacy, who is now, he's also another guy that's going to be on IR as well. I guess my thinking about it is really that a lot of people probably still think, now they're going back to things thinking, well, they beat the Bears 26-10, but yet there's still a long way to go for the Packers, to be a Super Bowl contending team, which I think even before the Dallas Cowboy game, I think even how the Packers played that week before against the New York Giants when they really struggled to kind of, punch it into the end zone. They could move the ball pretty well, but they couldn't score. And again, you've kind of seen that same thing against the Chicago Bears where in the first half, where they could easily move down the field, but they couldn't really capitalize on the yards that they were gaining. So, I think maybe some of the expectations just from seeing some of those games really probably changed my position where the Packers are. I think they are, even with the Minnesota loss this week, the second best team in that division. as of right now. But obviously things can change. And the other thing too, people will say that they can't perform these dinks and dunks and kind of play without a running back and expect to win the Super Bowl. But again, if you remember back in 2010, Brandon Jackson, who I believe only averaged like 3.5 yards, was our running back that year, and that offense kind of maybe a little bit more of a mixed bag of treats, but they did a lot of the slants and stuff, easier to get that separation. So maybe the Packers going back to that, especially with a lot of their receivers getting that lack of separation. This will help out. And the other thing, too, they did get Niles Davis. They're probably going to maybe have to make another move, during this almost mini bye week, that they might bring in another running back with Don Jackson, who they just brought in the day of the Packer game on Thursday off the practice squad. He's probably going to miss an extended period of time after he broke his hand. So, Niles Davis, he didn't play a big role on Thursday because he was obviously brought in on this past Thursday because he was brought in on Tuesday, only with the ball club for basically 48 hours. You could teach him some basic packages, and I think he did see some limited snaps late in the game when the game was already kind of signed, sealed, and delivered. But he's going to get used to more plays in the offense. He'll be fine. And eventually we will get James Starks back, and hopefully that will, he hasn't been performing. What is he, like 1.8 yards a carry so far this year? He's been kind of abysmal, but, you get back in there, you get a little bit, at least more depth, and hopefully, I'm assuming, and as long as Don Jackson, I'm assuming isn't going to be gone that long, they either keep him on the roster, wait till he gets healthy, or just add another player for that backfield. Because, I think the Ty Montgomery thing works. He does have that size. But, with his kind of his injury history, the little bit that is his history and his last year, basically, you probably don't want to over-abuse him and give him, 20 carries a game or 10 carries. I think he got 10 carries for 60 yards, something like that. But a lot of his carries did come off of one big run early in the second half. So, the play works with him out of the backfield to a certain extent, but I think if you kind of mix packages around, I think the Packers will be fine offensively if they keep up to it. I think the biggest thing leading up to that Dallas Cowboys game is the Packers' offense was just too stubborn that they thought they could just work through it, and sometimes you need to mix things up, go back to the basics, go back to the simple form of the offense. What they did now this past Thursday was go back to a true West Coast offense. And again, people say it's the Chicago Bears. They're now 1-6, not that good of a team. They had a pretty good secondary. They're a little banged up going into Thursday, as both the Packers were as well. So there is that. But they were ranked 11th in this, as far as pass defense is concerned. So it's really nothing to sneeze at. We can't always look at purely the records for these teams and saying, well, they're a bad team. You should obviously win these games 52-3. You go back to go back to 2011. The Packers were 15-1, and I bet you you could, if you were a mediocre quarterback or offensive team, you could have put up some pretty big passing numbers against the Packers back in 2011. If I remember correctly, I think they did against some pretty bad teams, maybe like the Christian Ponder-led Vikings. That might have been 2012. Can't quite remember, but something to that effect. So, so basically, a long-winded, long-answered way is that I still think they're not that good of a team. They're still probably around that 10-6, 11-5 team, somewhere around that area. But if they keep up, kind of with this basic offense, and then kind of work beyond it too at the same effect. I don't think you can run exactly what you ran against the Chicago Bears every week until the end of the season. I think that's the pickle they were kind of in beforehand with the offense that they had. So you just add wrinkles in each week, or different plays and stuff like that, and kind of use some of these receivers' strengths a little bit more. I think kind of what they're doing with Montgomery, I think they started to use in Cobb, even in the loss, I think against Dallas, I think they're kind of adding him a little bit more. And just you kind of got to wait, and hopefully that rapport with Jordy Nelson gets better week to week because, I think he's still recovering. So there's that. Davante Adams. I think Aaron Rodgers started to be like, well, he is the only guy getting separation. And really he has been one of the only guys that were getting clear-cut separation. But I don't know if Aaron Rodgers totally trusted him. I think they kept him out there on the field from what they've seen in practice, stuff like that. I know they seen good things in Davante Adams. And it finally, really showing up in a historic night. On Thursday night. And really, he's had a pretty decent year, too. And, being the third wide receiver for the Packers, I think that he's been playing okay. But even beyond that, just kind of trusting the receivers more, getting those packages, Jared Abadaris, kind of doing maybe some slant routes with him as well. Kind of easier, maybe a little bit of possession receiver. And then putting those guys like Davis and Janis in on those plays when maybe you want to bust something deep. Those kind of speedy receivers, and kind of mix them in on some certain plays too. Because I think one of the big things we see too is that they line up in these positions. They line up like an I formation, one wide receiver out, and it's either Janis or Davis. It's either going to be a run then, or if they're going to pass, it's just going to be a streak to either if it's Janis in there or if it's Davis. So put them out there when you do have Davante Adams and some of the guys that Rodgers can even trust more. So if the option of Davis or Janis is covered, you can kind of check down to maybe an Adams or a back shoulder throw to Jordy Nelson or Randall Cobb or something like that. And I think sometimes even in that Cowboys game too, I think they got a little too cute, rotating the receivers in there, but yet they only went in there to do the few things that they usually do. And they're, it wasn't mixed up pretty well. And hopefully, now, I think there was a pretty big rumblings that McCarthy's job could be on the line if they were to lose that game on Thursday, which, you hope Mike McCarthy realizes, and it should be too, especially the way the offense worked last year. You have to kind of keep that mentality week in, week out. You have to prove that you still belong here, that you can still get it done. Because, again, really that things that Rudy were complaining about for years, that a one and done or one win in the playoffs and done is not good enough, which, it's a spoiled answer, yes and no, but they used to be able to get away with it because they would always guaranteedly be in that position because they were the best team in the division. Now you got a team like the Minnesota Vikings that obviously 5-1 at this point of the season, and I still think, and I still said this at the beginning of the year and still hold true to it today, the Detroit Lions, they're kind of the cardiac cats are back. I think the cardiac cats back in was it like 2011 that kind of had that same thing. Ended up being a pretty good team, kind of almost competed for the division. Right now they're sitting at 4-3. So the Packers, lose next week. They got the Lions right behind them, ready to kind of to pounce, and they look like a team that could potentially be on the rise. That things are maybe going in the right direction for them. And again, sometimes it's Calvin Johnson. Those receivers, sometimes having that dominant of a receiver can hold you back a little bit because you know where they're going to be going. And so the division's going to be tough. But, hey, who knows? Maybe the Minnesota Vikings had been figured out today. The Vikings really, offensively they were very efficient with the ball. They put a little bit more heat, kind of dared you to, kind of almost what the Packers tried to do, I think, too, that first week of Sam Bradford. Started back in week 2. I think you try to kind of dare Stafford to throw the ball and hopefully get some turnovers. I think this team is good enough. The Vikings defense, they still had their chances. They got their turnovers that they usually get. kind of how that defense played. You know, I think the only touch